"Ma'am, step away from the gate. This flight isn't for people like you." The words cut through the morning bustle of Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport like a knife through silk. Gate 23 fell silent as passengers turned to stare at the scene unfolding before them. The speaker was Brad Mitchell, head of terminal security, a man whose 15-year career had taught him to spot trouble from across a terminal. And right now he was looking directly at it. The woman standing at Gate 23 didn't look like the typical first-class passenger Brad was used to seeing. No designer handbag, no expensive jewelry, no attitude that screamed money. Just jeans that had seen better days, worn sneakers, and a faded university hoodie that looked like it came from a thrift store. In Brad's world, that spelled one thing: fraud. Her name was Jasmine Brooks, though the boarding pass in her steady hand simply read, J. Brooks, Seat 1A. At 42, she had learned to dress down for a reason. Today, that reason was standing right in front of her, proving every suspicion she'd harbored about her own airline. Jasmine was the CEO of Skylink Airlines, worth over $2 billion, and the owner of the very aircraft sitting at Gate 23. But none of that mattered to Brad Mitchell, who saw only what his prejudice allowed him to see. "I have a boarding pass," Jasmine said calmly, her voice steady despite the familiar knot forming in her stomach. She'd been through this before, though never at her own airline. First class, Seat 1A. Brad's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Sure you do, lady. And I'm the Pope." Behind Brad stood Luis Rodriguez, a junior security officer whose uncomfortable shifting suggested he wished he were anywhere else. At 29, Luis had worked for Skylink for 3 years and had watched Brad handle situations like this before. It never sat right with him, but speaking up meant risking his job, and Luis had a baby on the way. At the gate desk, Amanda Foster looked up from her computer screen with practiced irritation. The 31-year-old gate agent had seen her share of passengers trying to upgrade themselves with fake documents, and she was always ready to back up security's calls. Near the boarding area, Carlos Mendoza continued mopping the floors while quietly observing the scene. At 45, the janitor had worked at Sky Harbor for over a decade and had witnessed more injustices than he cared to count. Today felt different, though. Today, something told him to pay attention. "Let me see that boarding pass," Brad demanded, extending his hand with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Jasmine handed it over without resistance, watching as Brad examined it with exaggerated suspicion. His eyes narrowed as he studied the document, looking for any excuse to validate his assumptions. "Printing looks off," he announced to no one in particular. "Amanda?" "What do you think?" Amanda glanced at the pass from her position behind the counter. "Hard to say from here, but better safe than sorry." Jasmine remained silent, her dark eyes taking in every detail of the scene. This was exactly why she'd come here today, dressed exactly as she was. For months, her office had been receiving anonymous complaints about discrimination at various Skylink gates, particularly Gate 23. Official investigations had turned up nothing, but Jasmine believed in seeing things for herself. Now she was seeing more than she'd bargained for. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." Brad continued, his voice growing louder and more authoritative. "We need to verify this document." "Of course," Jasmine replied. "Please verify it through your airline system." Brad's face flushed slightly. "System's down for maintenance. Has been all morning." It was a lie, and everyone within earshot knew it. Passengers had been checking in and boarding flights all morning without issue. But lies came easily to men like Brad Mitchell when they needed to justify their actions. "Then perhaps you could call your supervisor," Jasmine suggested, her tone remaining respectfully professional. "I am the supervisor here," Brad snapped. "And I'm telling you that boarding pass is fake." Behind them, passengers were beginning to murmur. A young woman named Sarah Williams discreetly pulled out her phone and began recording. Something about this scene felt wrong, and Sarah's journalism instincts were kicking in. "Look at her," Brad said to Luis, not bothering to lower his voice. Does she look like someone who can afford a $2,000 first-class ticket? Luis shifted uncomfortably. Captain, maybe we should just check the system. It'll only take a minute. The system is down, Brad repeated firmly. And even if it wasn't, you don't get to where she is by honest means. Trust me, I know these people. The phrase hung in the air like toxic smoke. These people. The mask was slipping, and Jasmine watched it fall with the detached interest of a scientist observing a particularly disgusting specimen. Sir Jasmine said quietly, I paid for this ticket with a valid credit card. If you'd like to verify that, I'm happy to provide additional documentation. Oh, I bet you would, Brad sneered. Probably have a whole folder of fake IDs in that backpack. Actually, it's just my laptop and some work files. Work files, Amanda chimed in with a laugh. What kind of work do you do? Let me guess you're an entrepreneur. The word entrepreneur came out like a curse, dripping with the kind of disdain reserved for people. Amanda assumed we're gaming the system. She'd made these assumptions before about other passengers who didn't fit her mental image of success. I work in aviation, Jasmine replied simply. Brad's laugh was even louder this time. Aviation. What you clean planes, something like that. The deflection only seemed to anger Brad more. In his experience, people who belonged in first class made sure everyone knew it. They name-dropped companies, flashed expensive watches, demanded to speak to managers. This woman's calm acceptance of his insults only confirmed his suspicions. You know what Brad said, stepping closer to Jasmine? I think we need to have a longer conversation about where you got this boarding pass and how you paid for it. I'm happy to answer any questions, Jasmine said, but I'd prefer to do so while still being able to make my flight. Your flight. Amanda scoffed from behind her desk. Honey, you're not getting on any flight today. The comment drew more attention from nearby passengers. An elderly man in a business suit looked up from his newspaper with obvious disapproval. A mother traveling with 2 young children pointed the scene out to her husband, shaking her head in disgust. Carlos, still mopping nearby, had stopped pretending to work and was now openly watching the confrontation. He'd seen Brad in action before, but never quite this brazenly. Louis Brad commanded radio for backup. We're going to need to escort this lady to the security office for questioning, Captain Luis said hesitantly. Don't you think we should at least try to verify? Are you questioning my judgment, Rodriguez? The threat in Brad's voice was unmistakable. Luis knew that Brad had the authority to write him up, get him transferred or even fired if he pushed too hard. With a baby coming, he couldn't afford to lose this job. No, sir, Luis said quietly, reaching for his radio. Jasmine watched the exchange with growing interest. She was seeing the culture of fear that allowed men like Brad to operate with impunity. Luis was clearly uncomfortable, but the power dynamic made him complicit in Brad's actions. You know, Jasmine said conversationally, in all my years of flying, I've never been questioned about my ability to afford a ticket. Yeah, well, maybe you've never tried to fly first class before, Amanda said with a smirk. Actually, I fly first class quite frequently. Where? On Southwest. Brad asked with a grin that told everyone nearby exactly what he thought of that idea. Various airlines, Jasmine replied. Though I have to say, this is definitely a new experience. Her composure was beginning to unnerve Brad. In his experience, people who were caught committing fraud became defensive angry or tried to run. This woman seemed almost amused by the whole situation. Luis Brad barked. Where's that backup? Luis spoke quietly into his radio, requesting additional security at Gate 23. Within minutes, 2 more officers would arrive, escalating a simple boarding pass verification into something much more serious. Sarah Williams continued filming her phone, capturing every word of the exchange. She had no idea she was documenting what would become one of the most viral videos in airline history, but her instincts told her this story was far from over. Amanda had returned to her computer, pulling up what appeared to be flight manifests, while occasionally glancing at Jasmine with obvious suspicion. Carlos had given up all pretense of cleaning and was now positioned where he could see and hear everything happening at the gate. The stage was set for what would happen next, though none of the participants could have imagined how dramatically the situation was about to escalate. 2 additional security officers arrived within minutes, their heavy footsteps echoing across the terminal as they approached Gate 23. The morning crowd was growing and more passengers were stopping to watch the unfolding drama. "What's the situation?" asked Officer Janet Torres, a 10-year veteran who prided herself on following protocol. "Suspected fraud," Brad explained tersely. "Fake boarding pass won't cooperate with verification." "I've been trying to cooperate," Jasmine interjected calmly. "I've asked multiple times for you to verify my boarding pass through your airline system." "System's down," Brad repeated for the benefit of the newcomers. Officer Torres glanced at her handheld scanner, which was clearly functioning and connected to the airline database. She looked at Brad with confusion, but didn't contradict him directly. The hierarchy was clear, and Brad was the senior officer. "Ma'am," Officer Torres said to Jasmine, "we're going to need you to come with us for questioning, and if I refuse, then we'll escort you." The euphemism hung in the air like a threat. Everyone understood what escort meant in this context. "I see," Jasmine said quietly. She looked around at the growing crowd of passengers, her gaze lingering on Sarah Williams, who was still filming. "And this is standard procedure for questioning boarding passes, when someone refuses to cooperate." "Yes," Brad said firmly. "I haven't refused to cooperate. I've asked you to verify my documentation through proper channels. Don't get smart with me, lady." The tension was escalating rapidly. Passengers were pulling out phones, some filming, others texting frantically. An elderly woman shook her head and muttered something about disgraceful behavior, though it was unclear whether she meant Jasmine's or security's. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us now," Brad said, reaching for Jasmine's arm. "Please don't touch me," Jasmine said firmly, stepping back. "I'll come voluntarily." But Brad was beyond listening to reason. The crowd, the cameras, the passenger complaints, it all felt like a challenge to his authority. In his mind, he was being filmed while a suspected criminal dictated terms. "That's it," he said, grabbing Jasmine's arm roughly. "You're coming with us." "Sir, please," Jasmine said, her voice remaining steady despite the physical contact. "This isn't necessary." But Brad was already pulling her away from the gate, his grip tight on her forearm. The other officers moved to flank them, creating a formation that looked disturbingly like an arrest. "This is wrong," called out a passenger from the boarding area. "She has a ticket. Mind your own business," Brad called back without looking. Sarah Williams moved closer with her phone, ensuring she captured every moment of what was happening. Her video was already live streaming to social media, and the viewer count was climbing rapidly. Carlos Mendoza, the janitor, watched with growing horror as the scene escalated. He'd seen Brad be rough before, but never this publicly, never this brazenly. Something inside him snapped, and he pulled out his phone to make a call. "Supervisor Martinez," he said quietly into his phone, stepping away from the crowd. "It's Carlos from Terminal 4. You need to know what's happening at Gate 23. Meanwhile, Jasmine was being pulled toward the security office, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. She didn't resist physically, but her presence commanded attention. Other passengers stopped what they were doing to stare at the spectacle. "Someone call the news," shouted a middle-aged businessman. "This is ridiculous." "Already on it," Sarah Williams called back, still filming. As they reached the security checkpoint, Brad's radio crackled to life. "Security office, this is Terminal Command. We're getting calls about an incident at Gate 23. What's your status?" "Under control," Brad replied curtly. "Suspected fraud in custody." But it was far from under control. In the social media age, nothing stayed contained for long, especially not when it involved the appearance of racial profiling at a major airport. Luis Rodriguez followed behind the group, his discomfort evident to anyone watching. He joined airport security to help people not to drag paying passengers away from gates, but he also knew that speaking up now would mean the end of his career. As they disappeared into the security office, the crowd at Gate 23 remained restless. Passengers were comparing videos, sharing contact information, and demanding answers from Amanda Foster, who was looking increasingly nervous behind her desk. The incident was rapidly spiraling beyond anyone's control, and the real consequences were just beginning. Inside the sterile security office, Jasmine sat calmly in a plastic chair, while Brad Mitchell paced like a predator sizing up his prey. The room was small, windowless, and designed to intimidate. One phone call, Jasmine said simply, "That's my right." Brad looked like he wanted to refuse, but even he knew the basic rules. Make it quick, and put it on speaker. Jasmine pulled out her phone and dialed a number from memory. It rang once before being answered. Brooks' executive office. Maria Santos speaking. "Maria, it's me. I'm at Sky Harbor Gate 23. It's happening exactly as we suspected." There was a brief pause. "Do you want me to execute Protocol 7? Give me 10 minutes, Jasmine said, her eyes never leaving Brad's increasingly confused face. "Then release everything." "Understood. 10 minutes starting now." "What the hell is Protocol 7? Brad demanded as Jasmine ended the call. "You'll find out soon enough," Jasmine replied calmly. "Look, lady, I don't know what game you're playing, but you're in serious trouble here. Fraud, trespassing, resisting security." "Actually," Jasmine interrupted, "I think you're the one in trouble, Mr. Mitchell." For the first time since the confrontation began, uncertainty flickered across Brad's face. Something about this woman's composure, her mysterious phone call, and her complete lack of fear was beginning to penetrate his arrogance. Luis stood by the door watching the clock and wondering what would happen when those 10 minutes were up. Brad Mitchell felt his control of the situation slipping, and like most bullies, his response was to double down. The security office felt smaller now, more claustrophobic, as if the walls themselves were pressing in on his authority. "Let's start from the beginning," he said, settling into the chair across from Jasmine with exaggerated authority. "Where did you get that boarding pass? I purchased it online through your airline's website." Jasmine replied evenly. "Using what credit card? A valid one?" "Don't get cute with me. I want details." Jasmine leaned back in her chair, studying Brad with the detached interest of someone observing an interesting insect. "Mr. Mitchell, what exactly are you accusing me of? Fraud? Identity theft? Maybe terrorism, depending on what we find." The terrorism accusation was so ridiculous that Luis actually flinched. Even he knew that questioning someone's ability to afford a first-class ticket didn't constitute grounds for terrorism charges. "Based on what evidence?" Jasmine asked. "Based on the fact that you don't look like someone who belongs in first class," Brad said, his frustration bleeding into his voice. "And what does someone who belongs in first class look like?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Brad opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. He was smart enough to know that any answer he gave would only dig him deeper into a hole he was just beginning to realize might be deeper than he thought. "That's not the point," he said finally. "Actually, I think it is the point." Luis shifted uncomfortably by the door. His phone had been buzzing with text messages for the past 5 minutes, but he didn't dare check it while Brad was in full interrogation mode. His girlfriend Maria worked in customer service for Skylink and had been sending increasingly frantic messages about something happening on social media. "Tell me about your job," Brad continued. "You said you work in aviation." "Doing what exactly?" Management, Jasmine replied. "Management of what operations? Where, here, and there?" Brad slammed his hand on the table. "Stop playing games. I want straight answers. I've been giving you straight answers. You just don't like them. The truth was, Jasmine was enjoying herself. For years, she'd heard stories like this from passengers, employees, and advocacy groups. She'd implemented policies, conducted training, and issued statements about zero tolerance for discrimination. But she'd never experienced it firsthand, never seen how easily authority could be weaponized against someone simply because of how they looked. "You know what I think," Brad said, leaning forward aggressively. "I think you're some kind of activist. I think you came here specifically to cause trouble to get a video that makes us look bad. And why would I want to do that? Because that's what you people do." The phrase landed like a slap. Luis's head snapped up, and even he couldn't pretend he hadn't heard what Brad had just said. You people. The mask wasn't just slipping now. It was completely off. "What people are those?" Mr. Mitchell Jasmine asked quietly. Brad realized he'd gone too far, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "Troublemakers. People looking for a payday. Professional victims." "Professional victims," Jasmine repeated. Interesting phrase. "Don't twist my words. I don't think I need to." Outside the security office, Brad's radio crackled to life. "Security Chief Crawford to security office. Come in immediately." Brad grabbed the radio with obvious irritation. "Mitchell here. I'm in the middle of an interrogation. Mr. Mitchell, this is James Crawford. I need you to stop what you're doing immediately and report to my office. Sir, I have a suspected fraudster in custody. I can't just—" "You can and you will. Immediately." The tone left no room for argument. James Crawford was the head of security for the entire airport, Brad's boss's boss, and not someone who made casual requests. "Copy that," Brad said reluctantly. "Rodriguez, watch the suspect," actually came Crawford's voice over the radio. "Bring Ms. Brooks with you. Both of you. Now." The use of Jasmine's name sent a shock through the room. Luis looked confused. Brad looked angry, and Jasmine looked completely unsurprised. "How does he know your name?" Brad demanded. "Protocol 7, Jasmine said simply. "What the hell is Protocol 7? "You're about to find out." Brad's radio crackled again. "Mr. Mitchell, you have 2 minutes to get to my office or I'm coming to get you myself." The threat was unmistakable. James Crawford was not a man who made empty promises, and his voice carried the weight of someone who was already extremely unhappy. "Fine," Brad said, standing abruptly, "but this isn't over." "Actually," Jasmine said, rising gracefully from her chair, "I think it is." As they prepared to leave the security office, Luis's phone buzzed again. This time he couldn't resist glancing at it. The message from his girlfriend made his blood run cold. "The video from Gate 23 is everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, TikTok. Hashtag Airline profiling is trending." "Who is this woman?" Luis looked at Jasmine with new eyes, wondering for the first time who exactly they had just detained, and why his girlfriend's message ended with 3 words that made his stomach drop. "She owns Skylink." While Jasmine was being detained in the security office, Gate 23 had transformed from a routine boarding area into the epicenter of a social media firestorm. Sarah Williams' live stream had attracted thousands of viewers, and her video was being shared across every platform imaginable. Amanda Foster stood behind her gate desk, frantically trying to maintain order as passengers demanded answers. Her usual authority had evaporated the moment the cameras started rolling, and she was beginning to realize that her casual participation in the discrimination incident might have consequences she hadn't considered. "Ma'am, when will the passenger be returned?" asked Robert Chen, a frequent flyer, whose platinum status usually guaranteed him respectful treatment. "This is clearly a case of racial profiling." "I don't know what you're talking about," Amanda replied nervously. Security was just following standard protocols. Standard protocols for what demanded Jennifer Walsh, a civil rights lawyer who had been waiting to board the flight, for questioning the legitimacy of a boarding pass. "Where are those protocols written?" Amanda couldn't answer because she knew there were no such protocols. The airline's actual policies were clear. Boarding passes should be scanned and verified through the system, not confiscated based on a gate agent's subjective assessment of whether a passenger looked like they belonged in first class. "I need to call my supervisor," Amanda said, reaching for her phone. But her supervisor was already on the way. Carlos Mendoza's call had triggered a chain reaction that was working its way up the airline's hierarchy at lightning speed. Michael Thompson, a pilot deadheading home after a week of international flights, stood near the boarding area filming his own video. As a 30-year veteran of commercial aviation, he'd never seen anything like this. "I'm Captain Mike Thompson," he said into his phone's camera. "I've been flying for Skylink for 8 years, and I can tell you that what just happened here violates every policy this airline has regarding passenger treatment. A woman with a valid first-class boarding pass was physically removed from this gate because security didn't think she looked right for first class. His video would eventually reach the pilots' union, the FAA, and several news organizations. But for now, it was just another voice in the growing chorus of outrage." Near the windows overlooking the tarmac, elderly passenger Margaret Walsh was on the phone with her daughter, a journalist for the Washington Post. "Honey, you need to see this. I'm sending you a video right now. This is exactly the kind of story you've been writing about." The ripple effects were spreading far beyond the airport. Hashtag airline profiling was trending nationally. Hashtag Gate 23 was picking up steam internationally, and Skylink Airlines was about to face the kind of PR crisis that could destroy a company's reputation overnight. Back at the gate, Flight 847 was now significantly delayed. Captain Sandra Martinez had been informed of the incident and was refusing to depart until she understood what had happened to her missing first-class passenger. "Control, this is Skylink 847, she said over the radio. "I need clarification on our passenger manifest. We show J. Brooks checked in for seat 1A, but she's not on board. Skylink 847 passenger was detained by security for questioning." "On what grounds?" There was a long pause. "Unknown at this time." Captain Martinez had been flying for 25 years and had never heard of a passenger being detained for unknown reasons. Something was very wrong, and she wasn't moving her aircraft until she got answers. "Passengers, this is your captain," she announced over the intercom. "We're experiencing a brief delay due to an administrative issue. I apologize for the inconvenience and will update you as soon as I have more information." But the passengers already knew more than she did. Social media had turned the cabin into a real-time newsroom, with travelers sharing videos, contacting journalists, and organizing what was essentially a protest movement from their airplane seats. Captain called out a passenger from first class. The woman they arrested is trending on Twitter. This is about to become a national story. Amanda Foster overheard the comment and felt her stomach drop. She'd been working for Skylink for 6 years and had never been involved in anything that attracted this kind of attention. She began reviewing the morning's events in her mind, trying to remember exactly what she'd said and done that might be captured on video. The memory of her comment about the boarding pass looking suspicious made her wince. The truth was, she'd barely glanced at it. Brad Mitchell had told her it was fake, and she'd supported him without question. It was easier than standing up to him, and Amanda had learned early in her career that going along with security was usually the safer choice. Now she was beginning to understand that safe and right were not the same thing. Carlos Mendoza had finished his phone call and returned to the gate area, but he wasn't cleaning anymore. He was watching, listening, and quietly documenting everything he saw. As the only employee present during the incident, he knew his testimony might be crucial to whatever investigation was surely coming. His phone buzzed with a call from his supervisor. "Carlos, I need you to stay at Gate 23 and keep detailed notes about everything you observe. Don't clean, don't move, just watch and document. We're sending a management team down immediately." "Yes, sir," Carlos replied. "Should I know who that passenger was?" "Just keep watching, Carlos. And whatever you saw, make sure you remember every detail." The instruction sent a chill through Carlos. In his 10 years at Sky Harbor, he'd never been asked to document anything like this. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than a simple boarding pass dispute. Much bigger. 7 floors above Gate 23 in the executive offices of Skylink Airlines, Maria Santos was executing Protocol 7 with the precision of a military operation. As Jasmine Brooks's executive assistant and crisis management coordinator, Maria had prepared for this exact scenario, though she'd hoped it would never be necessary. "David, I need you in conference room A immediately," she said into her phone while simultaneously typing furious instructions to her team. "Rebecca, James, both of you. Drop everything. We have a code red situation." Within minutes, Skylink's senior leadership team had assembled in the glass-walled conference room that overlooked the airport. David Kumar, head of legal, arrived with his laptop and a grim expression. Rebecca Martinez, VP of Customer Relations, burst through the door with her phone still pressed to her ear. James Crawford, Chief Security Officer, was already on his way down to deal with Brad Mitchell directly. "What's the situation?" David asked, setting up his laptop to project onto the room's main screen. "Our CEO was just detained by our own security for alleged fraud," Maria replied calmly. It's exactly what she predicted would happen. "Jesus Christ," Rebecca muttered, ending her call. The phones are ringing off the hook. Local news, national news, CNN, Fox. Everyone wants a statement. What are we telling them? Nothing yet. But we won't be able to stay silent much longer. Maria pulled up the live stream that Sarah Williams had been broadcasting. The 3 executives watched in horrified silence as they saw their colleague being physically escorted away from Gate 23 while Brad Mitchell made increasingly inflammatory comments. "He said, 'You people,'" David noted grimly. "That's going to be played on every news channel in the country." "It gets worse," Maria said, pulling up Twitter. "The hashtag Airline profiling is trending worldwide. We're getting tagged in thousands of posts, most of them calling for boycotts." Rebecca's phone rang again. "Martinez." "What? How many views?" "Shit." She hung up and looked at the team. "Sarah Williams' video has 2 million views and climbing. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. It's everywhere." "Stock implications?" David asked. "Trading is suspended pending company statement," Maria replied. "But futures are down 12% in overseas markets." The enormity of the situation was beginning to sink in. This wasn't just a customer service incident that could be handled with refunds and apologies. This was a public relations disaster that threatened the entire company's reputation and financial stability. "Where is Jasmine now?" David asked. "Security office with Brad Mitchell and Luis Rodriguez. James is en route to extract her." "Good. What's our legal exposure?" David's expression grew darker as he reviewed the videos on his laptop. "Civil rights violation, unlawful detention assault, assuming the dragging constitutes assault, defamation, and probably a dozen other claims I haven't thought of yet. Financial damages. Impossible to calculate. But we're talking about a woman who owns the company being publicly humiliated by her own employees. The symbolic value alone makes this case worth hundreds of millions." Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text message. "CNN wants a live interview in 30 minutes. What do I tell them?" "Tell them we're investigating and we'll have a full statement shortly," Maria replied. "But don't commit to anything specific." "The board?" David asked. "Emergency session called for this afternoon. They're flying in from across the country." Maria's phone rang and she answered immediately. "Yes, James. She's fine." "Good. Bring her straight up here. How bad is Mitchell?" "I see. Handle it however you think best." She hung up and turned to the team. "Jasmine is safe and en route. Brad Mitchell is, quote, a complete disaster and, quote, appears to have no understanding of what he's done." "Fire him," Rebecca said immediately. "Obviously. But that's just the beginning. Luis Rodriguez was involved. Amanda Foster at the gate was complicit, and we need to figure out how deep this goes. David pulled up employee files on his laptop. Mitchell's been with the company 8 years. No major incidents in his file, but I'm seeing some customer complaints that might have been underreported, meaning someone might have been covering for him. The implications were staggering. If this wasn't an isolated incident, if there was a pattern of discrimination that had been covered up, the legal and financial consequences could destroy the company entirely. "We need a full audit," Rebecca said. "Every complaint, every incident report, every customer service issue involving minority passengers for the past 5 years." "Agreed," David said. "And we need external investigators. This can't look like an internal whitewash." Maria was already taking notes. "I'll start compiling a list of approved firms. We'll need civil rights experts, not just corporate investigators." "Timeline?" Rebecca asked. "The news cycle moves fast. We need preliminary findings within 48 hours and a full report within 2 weeks." "What about immediate response? Jasmine will handle that personally," Maria said. "This isn't going to be some corporate apology written by lawyers. She was the victim, and she's going to respond as both the victim and the CEO." David looked uncomfortable. "Maria, with all due respect, having the CEO hold a press conference while she's emotionally compromised might not be the best." David, Maria interrupted. "You've worked with Jasmine for 5 years. Have you ever seen her emotionally compromised?" The question ended the discussion. Everyone in the room knew that Jasmine Brooks was the most composed, strategic leader they'd ever worked with. If anyone could turn this crisis into an opportunity for real change, it was her. "Preliminary response ready?" Rebecca asked. "Being drafted now. But the real response starts when Jasmine walks through that door." While the crisis team prepared for Jasmine's arrival, Maria Santos was simultaneously coordinating a deeper investigation that was uncovering disturbing patterns throughout Skylink's operations. Pull everything, she instructed her assistant Tony Kim over a secure conference call. Every complaint filed against Brad Mitchell, every incident report he's filed, every disciplinary action involving gate agents at Terminal 4. Within 30 minutes, Tony had compiled a preliminary report that made Maria's stomach churn. Brad Mitchell's file contained 17 customer complaints over 8 years, but only 3 had resulted in formal documentation. The rest had been marked as resolved informally, with no details about how the resolution was achieved. More troubling were the complaints themselves. Maria read through descriptions of passengers being questioned about their ability to afford their tickets, being asked for additional identification not required from other passengers, and being subjected to what customers described as hostile interrogation for minor issues. Tony cross-referenced these complaints with passenger demographics, Maria instructed. The results were exactly what she feared. Of the 17 complaints against Mitchell, 14 involved passengers with names that suggested minority ethnicity. 3 involved passengers who had specifically identified themselves as Black, Hispanic, or Middle Eastern in their complaint narratives. "There's more," Tony said grimly. "I'm finding similar patterns with Amanda Foster. She's been involved in 12 boarding disputes in the past 2 years, and 10 of them involved minority passengers, supervisory oversight." That's where it gets interesting. Foster reports to Terminal Manager Sandra Kowalski, who reports to Regional Director Paul Anderson. Anderson has been personally reviewing and dismissing complaints that involve allegations of discrimination. Maria felt the scope of the problem expanding exponentially. This wasn't just about Brad Mitchell's prejudice or Amanda Foster's complicity. This appeared to be a cultural issue that had been deliberately concealed by middle management. "Get me everything on Anderson. Employment history performance reviews, any internal communications about discrimination policies. Already on it. Preliminary review suggests he's been actively discouraging employees from filing detailed incident reports when discrimination is alleged. Covering his numbers. Looks like it. His performance bonuses are tied to customer satisfaction scores and complaint resolution rates. Fewer documented complaints mean better scores. Maria realized they were looking at a cover-up that went far beyond a single incident. Paul Anderson had created a culture where discrimination was easier to hide than address, where employees were incentivized to look the other way rather than stand up for passenger rights. Her phone buzzed with a text from James Crawford extracting Jasmine now. Mitchell is in complete meltdown. Rodriguez appears ready to cooperate fully. Tony, prepare 3 separate files, Maria instructed. Mitchell, Foster, and Anderson. Full documentation, all complaints, all patterns. We're going to need prosecutorial quality evidence for what's coming next. How high does this go? We're about to find out. The elevator doors opened on the 7th floor of Skylink's corporate headquarters, and Jasmine Brooks stepped out flanked by an entourage that would have made Brad Mitchell's head spin. James Crawford, the chief security officer, walked beside her with the grim expression of a man who had just witnessed something that challenged everything he thought he knew about his own company. Behind them came David Kumar and Rebecca Martinez, both carrying tablets and phones that had been ringing nonstop for the past hour. 2 FBI agents, Special Agents Patricia Williams and Michael Chen, brought up the rear. Their presence a stark reminder that this had escalated far beyond a simple customer service incident. Maria Jasmine said calmly as they entered the Crisis Management Center status report. 2.8 million views on the primary video trending in 12 countries. Stock trading suspended, board meeting called for emergency session this afternoon. Maria's delivery was crisp, professional, and comprehensive. Legal is preparing for multiple lawsuits. PR is fielding calls from every major news outlet, and we've identified patterns suggesting this incident is part of a broader cultural problem. Jasmine nodded, unsurprised. Mitchell suspended pending full investigation. Rodriguez is cooperating. Foster has been removed from gate duties. Terminal Manager Kowalski and Regional Director Anderson are being brought in for questioning. How far up does it go? Unknown, but we're prepared for the possibility that it goes to the C-suite level. The room fell silent. Everyone understood the implication. If discrimination had been covered up at the executive level, heads would roll throughout the company, possibly including people in this very room. "Show me," Jasmine said, settling into her chair at the head of the conference table. Maria activated the wall display, and suddenly everyone was watching the security footage from Gate 23. The angle captured everything: Brad Mitchell's aggressive posture, his dismissive gestures, the physical contact when he grabbed Jasmine's arm. But more than that, it captured the faces of the passengers watching the obvious discomfort of Luis Rodriguez and the casual complicity of Amanda Foster. Volume, Jasmine requested. Brad's voice filled the room. "Look at her. Does she look like someone who can afford a $2,000 first-class ticket?" Several people in the room winced. Rebecca shook her head in disgust. David was already taking notes for what would undoubtedly become a legal brief. "There," Jasmine said as they reached the moment where Brad grabbed her arm. "Stop there." The image froze on Brad Mitchell, physically restraining Jasmine while she remained calm and composed. The contrast was stark: a large, aggressive white security officer using force against a small, dignified black woman who was clearly not resisting. "Legal analysis?" Jasmine asked. "Textbook case of unlawful detention, assault, civil rights violation, and about 6 other charges," David replied grimly. The fact that it was captured on multiple cameras from multiple angles makes it impossible to dispute. Financial exposure. Conservative estimate, 50 to 75 million in immediate damages. But that's before considering punitive damages, class action potential, and long-term reputational impact. Class action. We're already getting calls from attorneys representing other passengers who claim they've experienced similar treatment. This could become the cornerstone of a much larger case. Agent Williams spoke up for the first time since entering the room. "Ms. Brooks, the FBI has been investigating complaints about airline discrimination for the past 18 months. Your incident provides us with probable cause to expand our investigation significantly." Meaning. Meaning we're going to be examining every complaint, every incident report, and every decision made regarding minority passengers for the past 5 years. If we find evidence of coordinated discrimination, this becomes a federal civil rights case. Agent Chen added, "We've already requested all employment records for Mitchell Foster and their supervisors. We're also going to need access to your customer service database and all related communications." Jasmine nodded. "Full cooperation. Whatever you need." "Are you sure about that?" David asked. "Once we open our files to federal investigators, we lose control of the narrative." "David, we lost control of the narrative the moment Brad Mitchell put his hands on me. Now we either cooperate fully and demonstrate that we're committed to change, or we look like we're covering something up." Rebecca's phone buzzed. "CNN is going live with the story in 10 minutes. They're calling it CEO in custody airline discrimination, caught on camera." "Statement ready?" Jasmine asked. "Draft prepared, but given the federal investigation, legal recommends we keep it minimal." "No." Jasmine's voice was firm. "This isn't a legal problem that we're going to solve with careful language. This is a moral problem that we're going to solve with honest action." Jasmine David said carefully, "Anything you say publicly can be used in court." "Good. Because I want there to be a record of exactly where this company stands on discrimination." Maria pulled up the draft statement on her tablet. "This is what we have so far. Skylink Airlines is investigating an incident involving security procedures at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. We are committed to treating all passengers with respect and dignity, and we will take appropriate action based on our investigation's findings." "No," Jasmine said immediately. "That's corporate nonsense. Real statement. I am Jasmine Brooks, CEO of Skylink Airlines. This morning I was physically removed from one of my own flights because airport security didn't believe I belonged in first class. This is unacceptable and it's going to change." The room was quiet. Rebecca finally spoke. "That's direct. It's honest. And honesty is what we need right now." James Crawford, who had been silent since entering the room, finally spoke up. "Jasmine, I need to tell you something about Mitchell that you should know before you make any public statements. Go ahead. This isn't his first incident. I've been reviewing his file and there's a pattern going back years. Customer complaints, employee reports, passenger grievances. All of them involving minority customers, all of them dismissed or buried by his supervisors. How many? At least 24 that we've found so far. Probably more." The number hit the room like a physical blow. This wasn't an isolated incident or a bad day. This was evidence of years of discriminatory behavior that had been deliberately covered up. "Who buried them?" Jasmine asked. "Terminal management, regional management, possibly higher. We're still investigating. Find out. All of it. Every complaint, every cover-up, every person who knew and did nothing." Agent Williams was taking notes. "Ms. Brooks, are you prepared for the possibility that this investigation might implicate people throughout your organization?" "Agent Williams, I've spent my entire career building this company based on the principle that every passenger deserves equal treatment. If there are people in my organization who don't share that principle, then they don't belong in my organization. Even if it means firing dozens of employees. Even if it damages the company's operations. Especially then, because a company that operates by discriminating against its customers isn't a company worth preserving." 20 minutes later, Jasmine Brooks walked into conference room B where Brad Mitchell sat alone at a metal table, still wearing his security uniform but stripped of his badge and radio. His earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the desperate look of a man who was beginning to understand that his world was crumbling around him. Luis Rodriguez sat in a chair by the wall, no longer in uniform, his face pale with the recognition that his career was likely over. James Crawford stood by the door like a sentinel, ensuring there would be no repeat of the morning's physical aggression. Also present were Agent Williams, Agent Chen David Kumar with his legal pad and a court stenographer who would create an official record of everything said in the room. Mr. Mitchell, Jasmine said as she took her seat across from him. "I'm Jasmine Brooks." Brad's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. But you were the woman from the gate." "I'm the woman you dragged away from the gate, yes? I'm also the CEO of Skylink Airlines." The color drained from Brad's face completely. Luis Rodriguez made a small whimpering sound. The full magnitude of what they'd done was finally hitting home. "This is impossible," Brad stammered. "You don't look like... you weren't dressed like what, Mr. Mitchell? Like a CEO? And how exactly should a CEO be dressed?" "Corporate clothes, expensive suits, jewelry." "I see. So in your mind, a CEO must be wealthy, well-dressed, and presumably white." "I never said white." Agent Williams leaned forward. "Mr. Mitchell, you're being recorded. I'd advise you to think carefully about your answers." "I want a lawyer," Brad said suddenly. "You're not under arrest," Agent Chen replied. "Yet. This is an administrative interview regarding your employment. You're free to leave at any time." "But if you leave, we'll assume you're not interested in cooperating with our investigation," Jasmine said calmly. "Which is, of course, your right." Brad looked around the room desperately. He understood the trap he was in. If he left, he looked guilty. If he stayed, every word he said was being recorded for use against him. "I was doing my job," he said finally. "Your job is to drag paying passengers away from gates," David Kumar asked, looking up from his legal pad. "My job is to protect the airline from fraud. And you determined I was committing fraud based on what evidence Jasmine asked. The boarding pass looked suspicious. In what way?" The printing was off. Agent Williams pulled out a plastic evidence bag containing Jasmine's boarding pass. "Mr. Mitchell, could you please point out what specifically looked suspicious about this boarding pass?" Brad stared at the document for a long moment. It was a standard Skylink boarding pass printed on standard Skylink paper with all the appropriate security features clearly visible. It was hard to tell in the lighting. The lighting at Gate 23 is airport standard fluorescent lighting, Mr. Mitchell. Are you saying you can't properly evaluate documents under normal working conditions?" "No, Look, I've been doing this for 15 years. I know when something doesn't look right." "And what didn't look right about Ms. Brooks?" Agent Chen asked. "She didn't fit the profile." What profile is that Brad realized he was being led into dangerous territory, but his pride wouldn't let him admit that his entire decision had been based on racial prejudice. "The profile of a first-class passenger," he said stubbornly. "Which is well-dressed, expensive accessories, confident demeanor." "Ms. Brooks seemed confident to me," David noted. "She answered all your questions calmly and asked you to verify her documents through proper channels. But she didn't look like she had money." "And how does money look, Mr. Mitchell?" Jasmine asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a sword over Brad's head. Everyone in the room knew that any honest answer would reveal the racial prejudice underlying his actions. "That's not what I meant," he said desperately. "Then what did you mean I meant she looked black?" Agent Williams said flatly. "Is that what you meant?" "No. This isn't about race." "Then explain to me what it is about." Jasmine said. "Because I'm a successful businesswoman with a valid boarding pass who was physically dragged away from a gate for no apparent reason other than your personal opinion that I didn't belong there." Luis Rodriguez suddenly spoke up from his chair by the wall. "It was about race." The room turned to him in surprise. Brad's face went white. "Luis, shut up," Brad hissed. "No, I'm not shutting up anymore," Luis said, his voice gaining strength. "I've been shutting up for 3 years while I watched you target passengers who looked different. I shut up because I needed this job, because I was afraid of what you'd do to me if I spoke up. Luis, you don't know what you're talking about, Brad said desperately. I know exactly what I'm talking about. You profiled passengers based on their race, their clothes, their accents. You made jokes about hood rats flying first class. You called Hispanic passengers probably illegal when you thought no one was listening. Agent Chen was taking notes rapidly. Mr. Rodriguez, are you willing to provide a formal statement about these incidents? Yes, sir. I have dates, times, names of passengers. I kept track because I knew someday it would matter. You kept track. David Kumar looked up with interest. I documented everything. Times, dates, what was said, what was done. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't know how to report it without losing my job. Where is this documentation? Agent Williams asked. At home in a notebook. I can get it for you. Brad Mitchell's face had gone from white to green. Luis, you don't understand. You'll never work in security again if you... Mr. Mitchell Jasmine interrupted. Mr. Rodriguez won't be working in security again anyway. None of us will be if we don't address what's been happening here. She turned to Luis. Mr. Rodriguez, your documentation will be crucial to our investigation. In exchange for your cooperation, Skylink will provide you with full whistleblower protection and assistance finding equivalent employment. Really? Really? What you've done took courage, and courage should be rewarded, not punished. Brad slammed his hand on the table. This is bullshit. You people always stick together. The phrase landed like a bomb in the silence of the room. Agent Williams looked up from her notes. Agent Chen stopped writing. David Kumar's pen froze on his legal pad. What people are those? Mr. Mitchell, Agent Williams asked quietly. I didn't mean... You've used that phrase twice today, Jasmine observed. Once at the gate when you said I know these people, and now when you said you people always stick together. What people are you referring to? Brad's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He'd finally said the quiet part out loud, and everyone in the room had heard it. Let me help you, Jasmine continued. You're referring to black people. You assumed I was committing fraud because I'm black. You assumed I couldn't afford a first-class ticket because I'm black. You physically removed me from the gate because I'm black and you didn't think I belonged there. That's not... Mr. Mitchell, everything you've said and done today has been recorded by multiple cameras and witnessed by dozens of people. Your own colleague has testified that you have a pattern of targeting minority passengers. At what point do you think denial becomes more damaging than honesty? Brad looked around the room at the faces staring back at him. Agent Williams with her federal authority, Agent Chen with his notebook, David Kumar with his legal expertise, James Crawford with his security background, Luis Rodriguez with his first-hand knowledge, and Jasmine Brooks, the woman he had humiliated, who now held his entire future in her hands. I want that lawyer. Now, he said quietly. That's your right, Agent Williams replied. But understand that your cooperation ends here. The investigation continues without you. And my job... Jasmine looked at him with something that might have been pity. Mr. Mitchell, your employment with Skylink Airlines was terminated the moment you put your hands on me. Whether you cooperate with this investigation or not won't change that. You can't just fire me. I have rights. I have union protection. You have the right to due process which you'll receive, but you don't have the right to use your position to discriminate against passengers. You never had that right. Brad Mitchell stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is revenge. You came here specifically to trap me. No, Mr. Mitchell, you trapped yourself. I came here to fly to New York. You're the one who decided I didn't belong on my own airplane. After Brad Mitchell and his hastily summoned lawyer left the building, the real investigation began. Maria Santos had assembled a task force of internal auditors, external investigators, and civil rights experts to examine what was becoming clear was a widespread cultural problem throughout Skylink's operations. The numbers are staggering, reported Dr. Angela Foster, a discrimination expert from the NAACP, who had been brought in to conduct an independent review. In the past 5 years, complaints involving allegations of racial discrimination have been resolved informally at a rate of 94%, meaning Agent Williams asked, meaning they were buried. No documentation, no follow-up, no corrective action, just marked as resolved and filed away. David Kumar pulled up spreadsheets on his laptop. We've identified 17 employees across 6 different airports who have patterns of complaints against minority passengers. The complaints were consistently dismissed by middle management. Who in middle management, Jasmine asked. Regional Director Paul Anderson appears to be the primary figure. He personally reviewed and dismissed 87 complaints over 3 years. His written justifications consistently cite lack of evidence or customer misunderstanding. Agent Chen was reviewing employee files on his tablet. Anderson's performance reviews praise him for maintaining low complaint numbers and high customer satisfaction scores. His supervisors saw the lack of documented complaints as evidence that he was handling problems effectively, when in reality he was just hiding them, Rebecca Martinez said with disgust. It gets worse, Dr. Foster continued. We've found evidence of what appears to be coordinated effort to discourage minority passengers from filing complaints. Gates agents and customer service representatives were trained to offer immediate compensation in exchange for not pursuing formal grievances. Trained by whom, Jasmine asked. Anderson primarily. But the training materials were approved by Terminal Operations Director Sandra Hughes. The scope of the conspiracy was becoming clear. This wasn't just about individual prejudice. It was about a deliberate effort to hide discrimination by buying silence and intimidating victims. Hughes's involvement, Agent Williams asked. She approved training protocols that specifically instructed employees to resolve cultural misunderstandings quickly and quietly. The training materials include language about certain passengers being more likely to misinterpret normal security procedures as discrimination. Coded language, Agent Chen noted. Extremely coded. But when you look at which passengers these protocols were applied to, the pattern is unmistakable. Maria pulled up a PowerPoint presentation on the main screen. We've mapped complaint patterns across all Skylink airports for the past 5 years. The data shows that minority passengers were 37 times more likely to have their complaints dismissed without investigation. 37 times. Jasmine's voice was deadly quiet. 37 times. And passengers who insisted on formal investigations were frequently offered flight vouchers, hotel stays, and other compensation in exchange for withdrawing their complaints. How much money? David asked. Preliminary estimate suggests Skylink spent over $2 million in the past 3 years, specifically to buy silence on discrimination complaints. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Skylink had essentially created a slush fund to cover up civil rights violations. Legal exposure? Jasmine asked. Catastrophic, David replied. If the federal investigation confirms these patterns, we're looking at criminal charges for conspiracy to violate civil rights. Individual employees could face jail time. Stock impact trading is still suspended. When it resumes, we're expecting losses in the billions. Board response emergency meeting this afternoon. Several board members are calling for immediate executive resignations, including mine, including yours. Jasmine nodded. She'd expected as much. When a company faced an existential crisis, boards typically looked for someone to blame, even if that someone was trying to fix the problem. Agent Williams. What's the federal timeline? Jasmine asked. Preliminary investigation will take 2 weeks. Full investigation could take 6 months to a year. But we'll need to make charging decisions within 90 days. And those charges could include conspiracy to violate civil rights, mail fraud, wire fraud, possibly RICO charges, if we determine this was a criminal enterprise. RICO, Rebecca asked. If we can prove that Skylink operated as a criminal organization to deprive passengers of their civil rights, It falls under racketeering statutes. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Skylink Airlines, which Jasmine had built as a symbol of inclusive business practices, was being investigated as a potential criminal enterprise. Recommendations, Jasmine asked. Full cooperation with federal investigators, David said immediately. Complete transparency, executive accountability, and comprehensive policy reform. Employee impact. We're looking at terminating at least 20 employees at the management level, possibly more at the line level. Some departments may need to be completely rebuilt. Do it, Jasmine said without hesitation. Every employee who participated in this cover-up, every manager who buried complaints, every supervisor who looked the other way, gone. Even if it disrupts operations, especially then, because operations built on discrimination aren't worth preserving. Dr. Foster spoke up. Ms. Brooks, this level of cultural change typically takes years to implement effectively. You're talking about rebuilding an entire corporate culture while under federal investigation and media scrutiny. Then we better start immediately. The board may not support this level of change. They may prefer a more gradual approach. Dr. Foster. I've been CEO of this company for 8 years. In that time, I thought we'd built a culture of inclusion and respect. This morning proved I was wrong. I'm not going to spend another 8 years making gradual improvements while passengers suffer discrimination. Agent Williams closed her notebook. Ms. Brooks, I have to tell you that your cooperation in this investigation may actually increase your legal liability. Everything you're revealing about company operations could be used as evidence against Skylink. I understand that, Agent Williams, but I'd rather see this company destroyed than continue operating as a vehicle for discrimination. The statement hung in the air like a declaration of war. Jasmine Brooks wasn't just committing to reform. She was willing to sacrifice her life's work to ensure that change actually happened. And everyone in the room understood that she meant every word. By 3 p.m. that afternoon, the 7th floor of Skylink Airlines had been transformed into a war room. Federal agents moved through cubicles seizing files. HR representatives processed termination paperwork, and lawyers fielded calls from news organizations around the world. The company that had started the day as a successful airline was ending it as the center of a national conversation about corporate discrimination. Brad Mitchell's termination was swift and absolute. James Crawford personally escorted him from the building, while cameras from 3 news stations recorded his departure. The man who had started the day believing he was protecting Skylink from fraud ended it as the face of everything wrong with corporate America. Mr. Mitchell's employment has been terminated for cause, the official statement read. He will receive no severance, no benefits continuation, and no references. His security clearances have been permanently revoked, and he is banned from all Skylink properties indefinitely. But Mitchell's termination was just the beginning. Luis Rodriguez, despite his cooperation with investigators, was also let go, though his package was significantly more generous. Mr. Rodriguez participated in discriminatory actions, Jasmine explained to the assembled media. However, his decision to document these incidents and cooperate with our investigation demonstrates a recognition of wrongdoing that we want to encourage, not punish. Luis would receive 6 months severance job placement assistance and a letter of recommendation that focused on his ultimate decision to do the right thing. It wasn't enough to save his career in security, but it was enough to help him rebuild elsewhere. Amanda Foster's fate was more complicated. Her involvement in the morning's incident was clear, but her role appeared to be more passive than Brad Mitchell's aggressive discrimination. Ms. Foster has been demoted from her gate agent position and transferred to cargo operations, Rebecca Martinez announced. She will undergo mandatory bias training, perform 100 hours of community service with civil rights organizations, and work under probationary supervision for 12 months. It was a humiliating demotion, but it wasn't a firing. Amanda would have the chance to redeem herself, though her career advancement at Skylink was effectively over. The larger terminations came as investigators worked their way up the chain of command. Terminal manager Sandra Kowalski was fired before 4 p.m. Her 30-year career ended by 3 years of looking the other way. Regional Director Paul Anderson was terminated with prejudice, forfeiting his pension and facing potential criminal charges for his role in covering up discrimination complaints. We've identified a pattern of willful blindness that extends through multiple levels of management, David Kumar announced in a press briefing. Every supervisor who knew about discriminatory practices and failed to address them is being held accountable. The terminations created immediate operational challenges. 3 major airports had to bring in temporary management, while Skylink searched for replacements. 2 entire customer service departments were disbanded and rebuilt from scratch. The company's training division was eliminated entirely and outsourced to civil rights organizations. But the most significant consequence was the federal investigation itself. By evening, FBI agents had executed search warrants at 6 Skylink facilities, seizing computers, files, and communication records that would form the backbone of what prosecutors were calling one of the largest corporate civil rights cases in American history. The evidence we've gathered today suggests a conspiracy to deny equal treatment to minority passengers, Agent Williams told reporters. This appears to have been coordinated, deliberate, and sustained over several years. Criminal charges were expected within weeks. Paul Anderson, Sandra Kowalski, and Brad Mitchell were all likely to face federal conspiracy charges. Several other managers were under investigation for their roles in the cover-up. The financial impact was immediate and devastating. Skylink's stock, when trading resumed, dropped 47% in the first hour. Credit rating agencies placed the company under review for possible downgrade. Major corporate clients began canceling contracts, and several airports threatened to revoke Skylink's operating privileges. We're looking at potential bankruptcy within 6 months if we can't restore public confidence, CFO Michael Torres reported to the emergency board meeting. The combination of legal costs, settlement expenses, and revenue losses could exceed our available capital. But Jasmine's response surprised everyone. Instead of trying to minimize the damage, she doubled down on transparency and accountability. We're going to publish every complaint, every investigation, and every settlement involving discrimination allegations, she announced. We're going to create a public database that shows exactly what happened and exactly what we're doing to fix it. The decision horrified the legal team. Jasmine, you're essentially providing a roadmap for lawsuits, David Kumar warned. Good. Because people who were discriminated against deserve to know they weren't imagining it, and they deserve to be compensated for what they suffered. This could cost hundreds of millions in settlements. Then that's what it costs. Because the alternative is continuing to operate a company built on the foundation of discriminating against our own customers. The board meeting that afternoon was contentious and brutal. Several directors called for Jasmine's immediate resignation, arguing that her leadership had failed to prevent the crisis and that her response was making it worse. "You're destroying shareholder value," board member Robert Sterling argued. "Your obligation is to minimize legal exposure, not maximize it." "My obligation is to ensure this company operates with integrity," Jasmine replied. Shareholder value built on discrimination isn't value worth preserving. The board has a fiduciary responsibility. The board has a moral responsibility that supersedes any fiduciary obligation. We either fix this company or we close it. Those are the only 2 options. When the board voted on a motion of no confidence, Jasmine won by a single vote. Her leadership would continue, but her authority was severely weakened. She would have to rebuild the company while fighting her own board, federal investigators, and a public relations nightmare that was growing worse by the hour. As the day ended, Jasmine stood in her office overlooking the airport where the morning's incident had occurred. Gate 23 was visible in the distance, now cordoned off as a federal crime scene. The irony wasn't lost on her that she could see the spot where she'd been dragged away from her own airplane while standing in the office where she'd spent 8 years trying to build something better. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maria. CNN wants an exclusive interview. NBC is offering prime time. Fox News says they'll give you a full hour. Jasmine typed back, "Schedule them all. If we're going to tell this story, we're going to tell it everywhere." The fight for Skylink's soul was just beginning. The transformation of Skylink Airlines began at 6 a.m. the following morning with the arrival of Dr. Angela Foster and her team of civil rights experts. They came armed with clipboards, laptops, and a mandate to rebuild the company's culture from the ground up. Every policy, every procedure, every training manual gets reviewed and rewritten, Dr. Foster announced to the assembled department heads. Nothing stays the same unless it actively promotes equality and inclusion. The first change was the implementation of the Zero Tolerance Protocol, a policy that made discrimination a firing offense for any employee regardless of seniority or position. Unlike the old policies that talked about discrimination in vague terms, this protocol was specific and actionable. Any employee who treats passengers differently, based on race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, or perceived economic status will be immediately terminated. The new policy stated, no warnings, no progressive discipline, no second chances. The policy included specific examples of prohibited behavior: questioning a passenger's ability to afford their ticket, requesting additional identification, not required from all passengers, making comments about passenger appearance or background, and using coded language like those people or certain customers. Training was mandatory for every employee from gate agents to executives. The sessions weren't the typical corporate diversity seminars that most employees slept through. These were intensive confrontational workshops that forced participants to examine their own biases and assumptions. Everyone has unconscious bias facilitator Dr. Marcus Johnson explained to a room full of gate agents. The goal isn't to eliminate bias. That's impossible. The goal is to recognize it and prevent it from affecting how you treat passengers. The workshops included role-playing scenarios based on real incidents from Skylink's files. Employees practiced handling situations where their assumptions about passengers were challenged. They learned to recognize the difference between legitimate security concerns and profiling based on appearance. Most importantly, they learned that questioning a passenger's right to be somewhere was never acceptable. Your job is to provide service, not to judge whether passengers deserve that service, Dr. Johnson emphasized. Every passenger with a valid ticket has earned their place on that airplane, regardless of how they look or what you think about their ability to pay. The technology programs were completely overhauled to eliminate opportunities for discrimination. The new passenger processing program included bias detection algorithms that flagged unusual patterns in how different agents handled customers. If Amanda Foster had been using the new program, alerts would have triggered within days of her pattern of questioning minority passengers' boarding passes. Supervisors would have been automatically notified and corrective action would have been mandatory. The program makes discrimination visible, explained Chief Technology Officer Sarah Kim. It's much harder to look the other way when the computer is automatically generating reports about discriminatory behavior. The complaint process was rebuilt from scratch with external oversight. Instead of being handled internally by managers who had incentives to minimize problems, discrimination complaints were now investigated by an independent panel that included civil rights experts, community leaders, and passenger advocates. Every complaint gets a full investigation period, announced newly appointed Customer Advocacy Director Carlos Mendoza, the former janitor whose call had helped trigger the federal investigation. No more informal resolutions, no more compensation in exchange for silence. Carlos's promotion from janitor to director raised eyebrows throughout the industry, but Jasmine defended the decision vigorously. Carlos Mendoza saw discrimination happening and spoke up, even though it risked his job, she explained. That's exactly the kind of moral courage we need in leadership positions. The whistleblower protection program was expanded and strengthened. Employees who reported discrimination were guaranteed protection from retaliation with financial rewards for validated complaints. The program was administered by an external firm to ensure independence from company management. We learned that fear of retaliation prevented employees from reporting discrimination, explained newly hired ethics director Patricia Williams, the former FBI agent who had investigated the Gate 23 incident. This program eliminates that fear by making reporting discrimination financially beneficial rather than career suicide. Customer service representatives were retrained to recognize and respond to discrimination complaints properly. Instead of trying to minimize or dismiss concerns, they were taught to validate passengers' experiences and ensure thorough investigation. When a passenger says they felt discriminated against, your first response should be, "I'm sorry that happened," not, "Are you sure the new training materials emphasized?" Discrimination is traumatic, and dismissing those concerns compounds the trauma. The changes extended beyond policies to physical infrastructure. Waiting areas were redesigned to eliminate opportunities for profiling. Security cameras were upgraded to ensure complete coverage of all passenger interactions. Audio recording was implemented in sensitive areas like gate desks and security offices. If you're treating passengers fairly, you have nothing to fear from being recorded. Patricia Williams explained to security staff. If you're not treating them fairly, the recordings will help us identify and correct the problem. The most controversial change was the implementation of reverse audits, where undercover passengers from various backgrounds tested treatment across the airline's program. These passengers, trained by civil rights organizations, booked flights and documented their experiences in detail. "We're not trying to catch employees doing something wrong," Jasmine explained to nervous staff. "We're trying to catch ourselves when our programs aren't working as intended." The audits revealed problems that policies and training alone couldn't address. Subtle differences in tone, slight delays in service, and unconscious body language that made some passengers feel less welcome than others. Discrimination isn't always intentional, explained audit coordinator Dr. Jennifer Martinez. Sometimes it's just the accumulation of small differences in treatment that add up to an overall message that some passengers are less valued than others. The response to these discoveries was more training, more awareness, and more accountability. Employees learned to monitor not just their words and actions, but their tone, their body language, and their assumptions about passengers. Community partnerships were established with civil rights organizations, minority business groups, and advocacy organizations. These partnerships provided ongoing oversight and feedback on Skylink's progress toward true equality. "Change doesn't happen in a vacuum," explained Community Relations Director Rosa Martinez. "We need external voices to tell us when we're succeeding and when we're still falling short." The partnerships included scholarship programs for minority students interested in aviation careers, internship opportunities designed to diversify Skylink's workforce, and mentorship programs connecting current employees with community leaders. But the most significant change was cultural. The company that had tolerated discrimination for years was now obsessed with preventing it. Equality became a core competency measured and rewarded like any other business metric. "We track discrimination complaints the same way we track on-time performance," Jasmine explained in a company-wide memo. "It's a key performance indicator that affects promotions, bonuses, and employment decisions." Managers were held accountable not just for preventing discrimination in their departments, but for actively promoting inclusion. Performance reviews included specific questions about diversity initiatives and bias prevention efforts. It's not enough to not discriminate, the new management guidelines stated. Managers must actively work to create environments where discrimination is impossible and inclusion is automatic. The transformation wasn't without resistance. Some employees complained that the new policies were too strict or politically correct. Others argued that constant focus on discrimination was creating a hostile work environment for non-minority employees. "Change is always uncomfortable," Dr. Foster acknowledged during a particularly heated training session. But discrimination was comfortable for some employees too, and that comfort came at the expense of passenger dignity and company integrity. Several employees quit rather than adapt to the new culture. Others were terminated for violating the zero-tolerance policy during the implementation period. But gradually, the resistance faded as employees realized that the new standards weren't unreasonable. They were just different from what had been tolerated before. Treating all passengers with equal respect isn't a burden, Carlos Mendoza told his staff. It's literally the job we're paid to do. 6 months after implementation, the results were measurable. Discrimination complaints dropped to near zero. Customer satisfaction scores improved significantly among minority passengers. Employee satisfaction increased as workers felt proud of their company's commitment to equality. Most importantly, passengers noticed the difference. Social media posts about Skylink shifted from complaints about discrimination to praise for inclusive service. The airline began winning awards for diversity and inclusion from organizations that had previously criticized it. The culture change is real, observed Dr. Foster during a 6-month review. This isn't performative corporate responsibility. This is a fundamental transformation of how the company operates. The changes had cost Skylink nearly $1 billion in legal fees, settlements, upgrades, and lost revenue. The stock price was still depressed, several executives had been forced to resign, and the company remained under federal oversight. But Jasmine considered it money well spent. "We spent $1 billion to become the company we always claimed to be," she told the board. "That's not an expense. That's an investment in our integrity." The public response to Skylink's transformation was swift, intense, and deeply polarized. Within weeks of the Gate 23 incident, the airline found itself at the center of a national conversation about corporate responsibility, racial justice, and the cost of doing the right thing. Social media became a battleground where supporters and critics fought over whether Skylink's response was appropriate or excessive. #Justice4. Jasmine trended globally as people shared their own stories of airline discrimination. #Skylink Survival emerged as a counter hashtag, where critics argued the company's response was destroying American business values. "This is what accountability looks like," posted civil rights leader Reverend Dr. Marcus Washington. Skylink didn't just apologize for discrimination. They dismantled the programs that allowed discrimination to happen. But business commentator Robert Sterling took a different view. Skylink's response is corporate suicide disguised as social justice. They're destroying shareholder value to appease political correctness. The cable news networks seized on the story as a perfect encapsulation of America's cultural divisions. MSNBC praised Jasmine's leadership and used Skylink as an example of how corporations should respond to discrimination. Fox News focused on the economic costs and questioned whether the response was proportionate to the offense. Jasmine Brooks has shown remarkable courage in choosing justice over profits, commented CNN's Anderson Cooper. "This is leadership in the truest sense of the word. She's destroying a successful company to appease the woke mob," countered Fox News' Tucker Carlson. "This level of corporate self-flagellation is unprecedented and dangerous." The most unexpected response came from other airlines. Faced with intense scrutiny about their own practices, major carriers began reviewing their discrimination policies and procedures. United Airlines announced a comprehensive audit of customer service complaints. American Airlines implemented new bias training for all employees. Delta committed to publishing annual diversity and inclusion reports. Skylink has raised the bar for the entire industry, observed aviation analyst John Peterson. No airline can afford to ignore discrimination issues when passengers are watching this closely. The academic community embraced Skylink as a case study in corporate transformation. Harvard Business School developed a curriculum around the company's response to crisis. Stanford's Graduate School of Business created a simulation where students had to navigate the competing pressures of shareholder value and social responsibility. The Skylink case challenges traditional notions of corporate accountability, wrote Harvard professor Dr. Michael Roberts. It demonstrates that sometimes the most expensive response is also the most ethical one. But the most significant endorsement came from passengers themselves. Despite the negative publicity and operational disruptions, Skylink's customer satisfaction scores improved dramatically. Passengers reported feeling more respected, more valued, and more confident that they would be treated fairly. "I used to dread flying," wrote passenger Jennifer Martinez in a widely shared blog post. "As a Latina woman, I always worried about being questioned or treated differently. Skylink's changes have made flying enjoyable again." The transformation attracted international attention. European airlines sent delegations to study Skylink's new policies. The International Air Transport Association invited Jasmine to speak at their annual conference. The United Nations cited Skylink as an example of corporate best practices in their annual Human Rights Report. "The world is watching how America handles corporate discrimination," observed British aviation journalist Sarah Thompson. Skylink's response sends a message that accountability is possible even in large corporations. Financial analysts remained skeptical about the long-term viability of Skylink's approach. The company's stock price remained depressed 6 months after the incident. Credit rating agencies had downgraded the company's debt. Several institutional investors had reduced their holdings. "Markets reward short-term profits and punish long-term thinking," explained economist Dr. Patricia Williams. Skylink is betting that ethical business practices will eventually translate into financial success, but that's a risky bet in today's economy. However, some signs suggested the bet might pay off. Corporate clients began choosing Skylink specifically because of their commitment to equality. The company won several major contracts from corporations that wanted to align their travel policies with their diversity values. "We switched all our corporate travel to Skylink because they demonstrated that they share our values," explained Tesla CEO Elon Musk. "Companies that fight discrimination deserve our business." The legal resolution of the federal case provided another boost to public confidence. Paul Anderson and Brad Mitchell pled guilty to conspiracy charges and were sentenced to prison time. Sandra Kowalski received probation and community service. The company itself paid a record-setting $150 million fine, but avoided criminal prosecution due to their cooperation with investigators. Skylink's willingness to accept responsibility and implement comprehensive changes convinced us that prosecution of the corporation itself wasn't necessary, explained federal prosecutor Maria Santos. "They've shown that accountability is possible without destroying the company." The settlement also included provisions for ongoing federal oversight of Skylink's diversity and inclusion efforts. Government monitors would review complaint patterns, audit training programs, and ensure compliance with civil rights laws for the next 5 years. "This isn't punishment," Agent Patricia Williams clarified. "This is insurance that the changes Skylink has implemented will become permanent parts of their corporate culture." The most powerful testament to the transformation came from Luis Rodriguez, the former security officer who had documented Brad Mitchell's discriminatory behavior. Luis used his whistleblower reward to start a nonprofit organization focused on training corporate employees to recognize and report discrimination. "What happened at Skylink can happen anywhere," Luis explained during a TED Talk that garnered over 2 million views. "The difference is whether companies choose to hide discrimination or eliminate it." His organization, called Truth in Service, was hired by dozens of corporations seeking to prevent their own discrimination scandals. Luis became a sought-after speaker on corporate ethics and the importance of speaking up against injustice. "I stayed silent for 3 years because I was afraid he told audiences. Skylink taught me that staying silent is more dangerous than speaking up." Amanda Foster also became an unlikely advocate for change. Her demotion and community service requirement led to volunteer work with civil rights organizations, which opened her eyes to the impact of discrimination on victims. "I thought I was just doing my job," she reflected in a documentary about the Skylink case. "I didn't understand how my assumptions about passengers were causing real harm to real people." Amanda's rehabilitation became a model for other companies dealing with employees who had participated in discriminatory practices. Rather than simply firing everyone involved, Skylink demonstrated that education and accountability could lead to genuine change. The documentary, titled Flight Path, Racism and Redemption at 30,000 Feet, won an Emmy Award and was viewed by over 50 million people worldwide. It became required viewing at business schools and civil rights organizations across the country. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from Jasmine's mother, who had lived through segregation and the civil rights movement of the 1960s. "I'm proud of you for not backing down," she told Jasmine during an emotional television interview. "Your grandmother would have been amazed to see a black woman own an airline and use that power to fight discrimination." The comment went viral, shared millions of times with messages of support and pride. It reminded everyone that the fight against discrimination wasn't abstract or political. It was personal, generational, and ongoing. Every generation has to decide whether they'll tolerate injustice or fight it, Jasmine reflected. "We decided to fight." 1 year after the Gate 23 incident, the human cost and redemption of Skylink's transformation could be measured in individual lives forever changed by those few minutes on a Phoenix airport tarmac. Brad Mitchell's fall was swift and total. The federal conviction made him unemployable in any security-related field. His wife, unable to handle the public humiliation and financial stress, filed for divorce 6 months after his termination. His adult children, embarrassed by the viral videos of their father's racist behavior, ceased contact entirely. But the isolation forced Brad to confront truths about himself that he'd spent 50 years avoiding. Court-mandated therapy sessions with Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a civil rights counselor, initially met fierce resistance. "I'm not a racist," he insisted during their first meeting. "I treated everyone the same." "Mr. Mitchell, we have video evidence of you treating passengers differently based on their appearance," Dr. Martinez replied patiently. "The question isn't whether you're racist. The question is whether you're willing to understand why your actions were harmful." The breakthrough came during their 3rd month of sessions when Dr. Martinez asked Brad to write letters to the passengers he'd mistreated over the years. The exercise forced him to remember faces, names, and incidents he'd dismissed as just doing my job. Mrs. Chen was traveling to her mother's funeral, he wrote in his journal that Dr. Martinez required him to keep. "I made her miss her connection because I thought her documents looked suspicious. She never got to say goodbye." The writing exercise revealed the human cost of his prejudice in ways that legal consequences couldn't. Each letter represented a life disrupted, a dignity wounded, a trust in institutions damaged by his assumptions about who belonged where. "I started seeing patterns," Brad admitted during a therapy session that his lawyer recommended recording for potential use in appeals. "I questioned black passengers more often. I was suspicious of Hispanic names. I assumed Asian passengers didn't speak English well. I was exactly the kind of person I claimed I wasn't." The realization led to a nervous breakdown that landed Brad in a mental health facility for 6 weeks. But it also marked the beginning of genuine change. Upon his release, he began volunteering at a community center in inner-city Phoenix, working with at-risk youth who reminded him of the passengers he'd once profiled. "These kids see cops and security guards as enemies," he explained to Dr. Martinez, "because they've been treated the way I treated passengers. I'm trying to show them that not all of us are like that." Amanda Foster's journey was different but equally transformative. Her demotion from gate agent to cargo handler was humiliating, but her community service requirement with the NAACP introduced her to a world she'd never understood. "I thought discrimination was obvious stuff," she reflected during a support group meeting for reformed discriminators, like calling people names or refusing to serve them. I didn't realize that little things being less friendly, taking longer to help making assumptions, were just as harmful. Her mentor, veteran civil rights activist Rosa Martinez, was initially skeptical about Amanda's sincerity. "White women crying about their mistakes is something we've seen before," Rosa said bluntly during their first meeting. "The question is whether you're here to feel better about yourself or to actually change." Amanda proved her commitment through consistent action. She spent weekends documenting discrimination complaints for legal cases. She testified in federal court about her role in covering up bias incidents. Most importantly, she began speaking to corporate groups about how ordinary employees become complicit in institutional racism. "I wasn't evil," she would tell audiences. "I was lazy. It was easier to go along with discrimination than to question it. That laziness hurt real people in real ways." Her presentations became popular in corporate training programs. Companies found that hearing from someone who had actually participated in discrimination was more powerful than academic lectures about bias. Amanda's marriage survived, though it required couples counseling to address how her husband felt about being married to someone who had become the face of corporate discrimination. Their teenage daughter initially refused to speak to her, ashamed by the viral videos of her mother supporting Brad Mitchell's racism. "Mom, everyone at school sees those videos," her daughter Kelly finally told her during a family therapy session. "They ask me if you hate black people." "What do you tell them?" Amanda asked, tears streaming down her face. "I tell them that you're learning to be better." "But it shouldn't have taken a black CEO getting arrested for you to figure out that racism is wrong." The comment stung, but it also motivated Amanda to do more. She enrolled in evening classes on African American history and civil rights. She read books by black authors. She attended diversity workshops on her own time. "I can't undo what I did," she told Rosa Martinez during one of their regular check-ins. "But I can make sure I never do it again, and maybe help other people avoid making the same mistakes." Luis Rodriguez's transformation was the most remarkable. His decision to document and report Brad Mitchell's discrimination made him a hero in civil rights circles, but it also cost him his career in security. No airport would hire someone who had been involved in such a high-profile discrimination case, regardless of his ultimate cooperation. Instead, Luis channeled his security experience into advocacy. His nonprofit organization, Truth in Service, became a model for corporate whistleblower protection. Companies began hiring him to develop programs that encouraged employees to report discrimination without fear of retaliation. "I spent 3 years watching Brad Mitchell discriminate against passengers," he would tell corporate audiences. "I documented everything, but I didn't report it because I was afraid of losing my job. That fear made me complicit in every passenger who was mistreated." His speaking fees and consulting work eventually provided a better income than his security job had. More importantly, the work gave him a sense of purpose that law enforcement had never provided. "I became a security officer to protect people," he explained during a podcast interview that was downloaded over 1 million times. "I ended up protecting a racist program instead of the people it was harming. Now I protect people by helping them speak up against discrimination." Luis's wife Maria, who had encouraged him to report Brad's behavior, became an advocate in her own right. She started a support group for spouses of workplace whistleblowers, helping families navigate the financial and social costs of doing the right thing. "Speaking up against discrimination isn't just an individual choice," she explained during a conference on workplace ethics. "It's a family decision because the consequences affect everyone." Their son, born 6 months after the Gate 23 incident, would grow up in a household where standing up for justice was a core value. Luis often joked that his son's first words would probably be "report discrimination." Carlos Mendoza's promotion from janitor to customer advocacy director represented the most dramatic career change of anyone involved in the incident. His willingness to call his supervisor when he witnessed the discrimination had been the catalyst for the entire investigation. "People ask me if I knew what would happen when I made that phone call," Carlos reflected during his first anniversary interview. "I didn't know anything except that what I was seeing was wrong." His new role put him in charge of ensuring that Skylink's transformation was genuine and lasting. He implemented feedback programs that allowed any employee to report concerns directly to his office. He conducted surprise audits of customer service interactions. Most importantly, he served as a visible reminder that the company valued moral courage over hierarchy. Carlos represents what we want every Skylink employee to be, Jasmine explained during a company-wide meeting. Someone who sees injustice and acts to stop it regardless of their position or pay grade. Carlos used his platform to advocate for other service workers throughout the industry. He testified before Congress about workplace discrimination. He consulted with labor unions about protecting workers who report civil rights violations. Janitors, security guards, gate agents. We're the ones who see discrimination happening, he told a Senate committee. But we're also the ones with the least power to stop it. Companies need to change that dynamic if they're serious about equality. His testimony helped pass federal legislation strengthening whistleblower protections for service industry workers. The Carlos Mendoza Act, as it became known, required companies to investigate and respond to discrimination reports within 30 days. But the change that meant the most to Carlos was personal. His teenage children, who had once been embarrassed by their father's job as a janitor, now bragged about his role in fighting discrimination. "My dad stopped racism," his daughter would tell her friends, slightly exaggerating but capturing the pride that the entire family felt in Carlos's transformation from invisible service worker to civil rights advocate. These individual stories of change became the real legacy of the Gate 23 incident. The legal settlements and policy changes were important, but the human transformations proved that redemption was possible even for those who had participated in discrimination. People can change, Dr. Martinez observed during a panel discussion about the Skylink case. But change requires acknowledging harm, accepting responsibility, and committing to do better. The people involved in this case showed that all three are possible. On a quiet Sunday morning, 1 year after the Gate 23 incident, Jasmine Brooks stood in her office overlooking the same Phoenix airport where she had been dragged away from her own airplane. The view was the same, but everything else had changed. The federal oversight period was ending ahead of schedule. Agent Patricia Williams, who had become something of a friend during the investigation, would be filing her final report the following week. The conclusion was unambiguous. Skylink Airlines had transformed from one of the industry's worst offenders to its acknowledged leader in civil rights compliance. "We've never seen a cultural change this comprehensive or this sustainable," Agent Williams had told Jasmine during their final meeting. "What you've built here is going to be studied for decades." But for Jasmine, the real measure of success wasn't in government reports or academic case studies. It was in the thousands of passengers who now traveled without fear of discrimination, in the employees who felt empowered to speak up against injustice, and in the industry-wide changes that Skylink's example had inspired. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Watching your interview on 60 Minutes. Your grandmother would be so proud." The interview, which would air that evening, had been difficult to film. Correspondent Anderson Cooper had asked the questions that still kept Jasmine awake at night. How had she, a black CEO, allowed a culture of discrimination to flourish under her leadership? What did her experience say about the persistence of racism in corporate America? Was the price of change nearly $1 billion and thousands of jobs worth it? "I thought I had built a company that treated everyone equally," she had told Cooper. "I was wrong. I had built a company that was very good at hiding inequality. The admission was painful, but necessary." Jasmine had come to understand that her position as CEO had insulated her from the daily discrimination that her employees were perpetrating against passengers. She flew in private jets, stayed in executive lounges, and interacted primarily with other executives who knew who she was. "The irony is that my success made me blind to the discrimination happening in my own company," she reflected during a Harvard Business School case study interview that would become required reading. "I was the most powerful person in the building, but I had to dress as a customer to see what was really happening." The lesson had changed how she approached leadership entirely. She now spent at least 1 day per month working incognito in frontline positions: gate agent, customer service representative, flight attendant. It was the only way to ensure that the equality she mandated from the executive suite was actually being practiced in the terminals. "You can't lead what you can't see," she would tell other CEOs who sought her advice on preventing discrimination. And power has a way of making discrimination invisible to the people with the authority to stop it. Her approach had attracted attention from across corporate America. Dozens of CEOs had visited Skylink to study their transformation process. Business schools developed entire curricula around her leadership model. The Harvard Business Review published a cover story titled "The Jasmine Brooks Method: Leading Through Crisis with Moral Courage." But the recognition came with a price. Death threats arrived regularly, mostly from people who believed her response to discrimination had been excessive or politically motivated. Her security detail had been expanded twice. Her children's schools had implemented additional safety measures. "The threats remind me why this work is necessary," she told her security chief during a weekly briefing. People who get this angry about accountability for discrimination are exactly the people who need to be held accountable. More painful than the threats was the criticism from within her own industry. Several airline executives had publicly questioned whether Skylink's response had been good for business. Others argued that the attention to discrimination was creating hostile work environments for white employees. "Jasmine Brooks has created a climate of fear in her company," one competitor had told the Wall Street Journal. "Employees are afraid to make any decisions about passengers because they might be accused of discrimination." The criticism stung because it contained a grain of truth. Some Skylink employees did report feeling anxious about their interactions with minority passengers, concerned that any misstep would be interpreted as discrimination. The company had responded with additional training and clear guidelines, but the adjustment period had been challenging. Change is uncomfortable. Jasmine had told her leadership team during a quarterly review, but maintaining discrimination was uncomfortable too, just not for us. The financial impact had been substantial, but not catastrophic. Skylink's stock price had recovered to within 10% of pre-incident levels. Customer satisfaction scores were at an all-time high. Most importantly, the company had attracted a generation of young employees who wanted to work for an organization with clear moral values. "We're hiring people who want to be part of something meaningful." Chief HR Officer Patricia Martinez reported during a board meeting. That's translated into lower turnover, higher productivity, and better customer service. The changes had also attracted new business from corporate clients who wanted their travel policies to align with their diversity commitments. Skylink had become the preferred airline for companies that prioritized social responsibility, creating a competitive advantage that traditional airlines struggled to match. "Our commitment to equality has become a differentiating factor in the market," CFO Michael Torres explained to investors. "Corporate clients are choosing us specifically because of our values, not despite them." The most satisfying aspect of the transformation was its sustainability. The policies and procedures implemented after Gate 23 had become embedded in Skylink's corporate culture. New employees were trained in bias recognition and civil rights compliance from their first day. Discrimination prevention was tracked and measured like any other business metric. "We've created programs that make discrimination difficult and reporting it easy," Jasmine explained during a keynote address at the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People annual convention. "The goal isn't perfect employees, it's programs that catch imperfections before they harm passengers." But the deepest impact was personal. The Gate 23 incident had forced Jasmine to confront her own assumptions about racism in America. She had believed that education, wealth, and success provided insulation from discrimination. Her experience proved that protection was an illusion. "I thought I had transcended race," she admitted during a deeply personal interview with Oprah Winfrey. "I learned that race doesn't transcend anything you just get discriminated against in nicer buildings." The realization had changed her approach to philanthropy and advocacy. The Jasmine Brooks Foundation, established with her settlement money from the federal case, focused on training corporate employees to recognize and prevent discrimination. The foundation's motto was simple: see it, stop it, report it. "We can't rely on victims to fight discrimination," she explained during the foundation's launch event. "We need bystanders to become advocates and institutions to become allies." As the sun set over Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, Jasmine reflected on the journey from that humiliating morning to this moment of hard-won progress. The view from her office window included Gate 23, now equipped with a small plaque that read, "Equality requires constant vigilance. JB." Her phone rang with a call from Luis Rodriguez, checking in with a monthly update on Truth in Service's latest corporate trainings. "3 more companies signed up this week," he reported, "including one of your competitors." "Good," Jasmine replied. This was never about Skylink winning. It was about the industry changing. "Any regrets?" Luis asked, a question he posed during every call. "About speaking up? Never. About the cost? Sometimes. But then I remember why we did it." "Why?" "Because staying silent would have cost more." The final test of Skylink's transformation came on a February morning exactly 1 year and 1 day after the Gate 23 incident. Jasmine Brooks walked through Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport dressed exactly as she had been that previous February. Faded jeans, worn sneakers, university hoodie, no jewelry, no entourage. She approached Gate 23 carrying a first-class boarding pass for Flight 847 to New York, the same flight number from which she had been dragged away 12 months earlier. The symbolism was intentional. She wanted to see if the change was real or just another corporate performance. The gate agent, a young Hispanic woman named Isabella Rodriguez, looked up from her computer with a genuine smile. "Good morning, Ms. Brooks. Welcome to Skylink. Are you ready to board?" No double take at her clothes. No question about her ability to afford the ticket. No suspicious examination of her boarding pass. Just professional courtesy extended to every passenger regardless of appearance. "Thank you, Isabella," Jasmine replied, using the agent's name from her badge. "Have you been with the company long? 6 months, Isabella said proudly. "I love working here. The training was incredible, and the company really supports us when we stand up for passengers. The transformation was complete." A year earlier, gate agents had been trained to question passengers who didn't look right. Now they were trained to serve everyone with equal dignity and empowered to report discrimination without fear. As Jasmine walked down the jet bridge to her aircraft, she passed the spot where Brad Mitchell had grabbed her arm. The memory still stung, but it no longer carried shame. It carried purpose. Captain Maria Santos greeted her at the aircraft door. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Brooks. We're honored to have you flying with us today." The flight crew was diverse in ways that Skylink had never achieved before the incident. The changes hadn't just eliminated discrimination. They had attracted people of color to positions throughout the company. "Thank you, Captain Santos," Jasmine replied. "But today, I'm just another passenger. Every passenger is important to us." Captain Santos responded, and Jasmine knew she meant it. As Flight 847 lifted off from Phoenix, Jasmine looked down at the terminal where her journey had begun. Gate 23 was visible in the distance, no longer a symbol of humiliation, but a reminder of how quickly the world could change when people chose courage over comfort. Her phone buzzed with a message from Maria Santos in the corporate office. "The documentary about our transformation just won the Academy Award for Best Documentary. They dedicated it to all the passengers who speak up when silence would be easier." Jasmine smiled, closed her laptop, and settled in for the flight to New York. She had work to do when she landed. 3 other airlines wanted her help implementing similar changes, and the Department of Transportation had asked her to testify about federal anti-discrimination requirements. The fight for equality would continue. But today, for the first time in a year, she was just a passenger flying home. The sun was setting over Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport as Dr. Angela Foster walked through Terminal 4, completing her final assessment of Skylink Airline's transformation. As the independent civil rights monitor appointed by the federal court, her 18-month oversight period was ending, and her final report would determine whether Skylink had truly changed or merely performed change for public consumption. The transformation is remarkable and sustainable, she would write in her conclusion. Skylink Airlines has not just eliminated discriminatory practices, they have created a culture where discrimination is prevented, detected, and eliminated before it can cause harm. The evidence was overwhelming. Discrimination complaints had dropped to near zero across all Skylink operations. Customer satisfaction scores among minority passengers had reached record highs. Employee turnover was at an all-time low, and the company was consistently rated as one of the best places to work in the airline industry. But more telling than the statistics were the human stories that emerged from Dr. Foster's interviews with passengers and employees. "I used to dread flying," wrote passenger Jennifer Walsh in a testimonial letter. "As a black woman traveling for business, I expected to be questioned, delayed, or treated differently. Skylink changed all of that. They made flying enjoyable again. The company gives us tools to fight discrimination, not hide it," explained gate agent Carlos Martinez during an employee interview. "If I see a passenger being treated unfairly, I'm expected to intervene, not look the other way." The cultural shift extended beyond Skylink to influence the entire aviation industry. The Skylink standard had become shorthand for comprehensive anti-discrimination policies. Other airlines, facing increased scrutiny from passengers and regulators, had implemented similar programs. United Airlines hired Luis Rodriguez to redesign their bias training program. Delta partnered with the Jasmine Brooks Foundation to audit their complaint handling procedures. American Airlines established their own whistleblower protection program modeled on Skylink's Truth in Service initiative. The industry has changed because one company chose accountability over damage control, observed aviation analyst Sarah Kim during a CNN interview. Skylink proved that doing the right thing is also good business. The academic community had embraced the Skylink case as a model for corporate transformation. Harvard Business School's case study had been downloaded over 100,000 times. Stanford's business ethics course used Skylink's response as an example of moral leadership under pressure. The Brooks model had become a framework taught in business schools worldwide: immediate accountability, comprehensive investigation, transparent communication, complete transformation, and sustained commitment to change. International recognition followed. The European Union invited Jasmine to testify about corporate civil rights compliance. The United Nations cited Skylink in their annual report on business and human rights. The company won awards from civil rights organizations in 12 countries. But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The family of Rosa Parks invited Jasmine to speak at the annual Rosa Parks Institute dinner held each year to honor people who had furthered the cause of civil rights. Ms. Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus Jasmine told the audience of civil rights leaders and corporate executives. 67 years later, I was dragged away from a gate at my own airline for the same reason she was forced off that bus, because someone decided I didn't belong there. The fight for equality isn't over. It just happens in different venues. The speech was viewed over 10 million times on social media and became required viewing in many corporate diversity training programs. The financial impact of Skylink's transformation had been significant, but ultimately positive. Initial losses from legal settlements, policy implementation, and public relations damage totaled nearly $800 million. But increased customer loyalty, improved employee retention, and new corporate partnerships had recovered most of those costs within 18 months. We learned that integrity is profitable. CFO Michael Torres explained to investors during a quarterly earnings call. The companies and customers who value equality are also the ones who provide the most stable long-term business relationships. Stock prices had not only recovered, but exceeded pre-incident levels as investors recognized that Skylink's commitment to equality provided a competitive advantage in an increasingly diverse marketplace. The legal legacy was equally significant. The federal civil rights case had resulted in new precedents for corporate accountability in discrimination cases. The Carlos Mendoza Act strengthened whistleblower protections for service industry workers. The Jasmine Brooks standard required federal contractors to implement comprehensive anti-discrimination programs. This case changed how the law treats corporate discrimination, explained federal prosecutor Maria Santos during a legal conference. Companies can no longer claim ignorance about discriminatory practices by their employees. The law now requires active prevention, not just reactive punishment. Personal transformations continued among the individuals most directly affected by the incident. Brad Mitchell, after serving 6 months in federal prison for civil rights violations, had become an unlikely advocate for bias training in law enforcement. His presentations to police departments about the dangers of profiling were surprisingly effective, partly because of his credibility as someone who had lost everything to prejudice. "I was a racist who didn't think I was a racist," he would tell audiences. "That's the most dangerous kind because you can't fix what you won't acknowledge." Amanda Foster had completed her community service and probation, but continued volunteering with civil rights organizations. Her presentations about unconscious bias became popular in corporate training programs because of her authentic acknowledgement of harm caused. "I thought I was just following procedures," she would explain to corporate audiences. "I didn't realize that my assumptions about passengers were written into those procedures." That's how discrimination becomes institutional when individual prejudices get turned into company policies. Luis Rodriguez's nonprofit organization, Truth in Service, had expanded to work with corporations in 6 countries. His approach protecting employees who report discrimination while educating those who commit it had become a model for workplace civil rights programs worldwide. Carlos Mendoza had used his platform as customer advocacy director to champion workers' rights throughout the service industry. His testimony before Congress had led to expanded protections for workers who report civil rights violations. But perhaps the most significant change was in Gate 23 itself. The small plaque Jasmine had installed "Equality requires constant vigilance." JB had been joined by a larger display featuring photos and stories of passengers who had experienced discrimination and employees who had spoken up to stop it. The display included a photo of the original incident with Brad Mitchell dragging Jasmine away from the gate. But it was surrounded by pictures of diverse passengers being served with dignity, of employees receiving awards for standing up against discrimination, and of the company's ongoing commitment to equality. "We don't hide from what happened here," explained current Gate 23 supervisor Rosa Martinez during a tour for visiting corporate executives. "We celebrate how far we've come and remind ourselves that the work is never finished." The final measure of Skylink's transformation came from an unlikely source: the passengers themselves. Social media had once been filled with complaints about airline discrimination. Now #SkylinkCares and #FlyWithDignity were trending hashtags as passengers shared positive experiences. "I watched the video of Ms. Brooks being dragged away from this gate," posted passenger Michael Chen. "Today, I flew through the same gate and was treated like a valued customer." That's what real change looks like. As Dr. Foster completed her final walkthrough of Terminal 4, she reflected on the remarkable journey from that February morning when discrimination was recorded and broadcast to the world. The programs that had allowed such discrimination had been completely dismantled and rebuilt. The culture that had tolerated prejudice had been replaced with one that actively promoted equality. "Change is possible," she wrote in her final paragraph, "but it requires more than policies and training. It requires leadership willing to sacrifice short-term comfort for long-term integrity." Jasmine Brooks and Skylink Airlines proved that accountability and equality are not just moral imperatives, they're practical business strategies. The oversight period was ending, but the vigilance would continue. Skylink had learned that equality isn't a destination, but a journey requiring constant attention and commitment. And at Gate 23, where it all began, passengers of every background continued to board flights with dignity, knowing that their right to equal treatment was protected not just by policies, but by a culture that had been fundamentally transformed through the courage to confront uncomfortable truths and the commitment to build something better. The plaque's message remained as relevant as ever. Equality requires constant vigilance. And Skylink Airlines would remain vigilant. Have you ever been judged by someone who didn't know they were looking at their next boss? Have you stayed silent when you should have spoken up? This story reminds us that courage comes in many forms, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to accept unfair treatment. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. And make sure to subscribe because stories of justice and transformation happen every day, and we're here to tell them. Remember, equality isn't something that happens to us. It's something we create together, one brave choice at a time. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay kind, and never underestimate the power of standing up for what's right.